Hello everybody, welcome to Totally Tabled. My name is Shaggy, and today I'm just going to give you my quick first impressions of Frostpunk, the board game. I just posted a full solo playthrough of this on the channel, please go check that out. As always with these review videos, I assume that you've watched that playthrough or that you at least know how the game works. Now, I've kind of already let the cat out of the bag about how I feel about this game, especially if you've watched my top 10 solo games of 2022, because spoiler alert, it was my #1 game of the year. It even beat out the new Lacerda game, and that is extremely rare, so you know I absolutely love the game. I'm giving this game a rare 9 out of 10, meaning it would have been in my top 50 games of all time list had I played it before making that list. So there you go. If all you care about is the number, 9 out of 10, game of 2022, absolutely love it. Now, I'm told you need to say negative things about games you love in order for it to be a fair review. So let's start with some of the negatives, or even the potential negatives that people might have, before we start talking about all the positives. It's a very long game. I mean, there's just no two ways around it. It takes a long time, there's a lot of actions, and each round has a lengthy sort of process, multiple phases where you have to do, precise things in order. And so your first couple of games, it takes even longer as you're sort of learning that process. Now, it quickly becomes second nature, right? Hey, dawn phase, draw a card, resolve it, bring everyone back. They need to sleep. Morning phase, draw a morning card. It's not difficult, and you learn it right away, but you're doing that round after round after round. So it's not just that it's long, it's that you're doing a lot in this game. There's just a lot to it. The other thing is it's brutally difficult. Now, you may not have been able to tell that if you just watched the playthrough, but the game is hard. The first couple of games I played, I got destroyed, and in fact, I was wondering whether or not the game was even beatable at that point. If you go on Board Game Geek, there's threads about, this game is just too hard. As I played more, and I tried different strategies, and I just pulled different levers and started to figure things out, it started to seem beatable. But it is still a brutally hard game. Think Robinson Crusoe, think This War of Mine. I'm going to be mentioning those two games a lot, because those are also brutally hard survival games. That's not a negative for me, but I know it might be a negative for some people. The theme here is also pretty dark. Again, I love this theme, but just be aware. And for me, this is a solo-only game. This is a solo game. It has ways of spreading out the decision-making and the responsibilities so that you can play it with more players. And I could see that being fun. I could see you role-playing that, and that could be a good time. For me, and again, this is a lot like This War of Mine. For me, I really want to play this solo. I want to be making all the decisions because there's a lot of strategy here. That might be my thing. Other people might enjoy it multiplayer. Do keep in mind, though, that all my thoughts are on the solo game. I've only played this solo. And that's pretty much it. Those are the only potential negatives that I can think about. Everything else is extremely positive with this game. I find the city building here to be really unique. This doesn't just feel like, survival suburbia or something like that. It's not just about putting buildings next to other buildings to score points, right? You're uncovering snow, you're removing resources, and you're trying to place these buildings, keeping a couple of things in mind. One is the heat. And that is a great, exciting, thematic sort of mechanism where you got to keep feeding these coal into the generator that's providing the heat to keep your civilization alive. And every round, it just gets harder and harder. It takes more and more coal to do that. So you're trying to place the buildings that are difficult to insulate, or that, the actions that you really need to take now close to the generator, so it'll be easier to keep it heated. That's really cool, but there's like this timing thing because you don't want to just build onto spaces that have a bunch of resources and then lose them. So you need to explore, get the resources off, build the buildings. There are a few buildings where, like those really critical gathering posts where you really want to strategically place that around a bunch of goods, a bunch of wood and coal and stuff so that you can, for one action, grab a ton of stuff. There's sawmills where you want to place it on the same tile as those trees. Or, when you upgrade the sawmill, you can then tear down trees from adjacent tiles. And so, if you have a little forest that gets formed, you want to put a sawmill right in there and, use that to get the wood that you're going to need. And it's very cool because you have to come up with these solutions, right? You're drawing resources from the board as you explore, but those are running out. There's not going to be enough there to last you for the whole game. So you have to come up with these little solutions to get sustainable resources coming in for the end game. And I don't know, I find how all that works to be very satisfying. And because this thing is focused on that city building aspect, it gives it a very different feel from the other survival games that I love. This is from the same designer as Nemesis, another great survival horror game. This obviously feels very different from that. It feels very different from Robinson Crusoe or This War of Mine. But I think what Frostpunk does that's so ingenious is it injects quite a lot of DNA from Robinson Crusoe particularly. And that mesh of this sort of survival city building stuff with the Robinson Crusoe event system, where events are giving you sort of an immediate kind of result, but then might have future unforeseen consequences. That's handled brilliantly. But it goes even deeper than that because in Robinson Crusoe, managing the morale of your survivors is critical. Keeping that determination flowing and keeping those special abilities going. And I really think Frostpunk has that same thing. It has its own very interesting, much more complex system for, measuring the morale of your society. You have those hope tokens and you have those discontent tokens. 3 different types, and each one can be kind of either not there on the board or can be inactive or activated. And managing that is critical because everything in the game sort of flows through that. The vast majority of the events are going to reference the morale of your society. Do you have this hope token? Do you have this discontent token? Do you have more hope than discontent, or vice versa? All of that's going to matter. And it's going to affect sort of whether the event is going to be something that's really going to harm you or maybe do great things for you. It's going to alter the decision space, what you can choose. And not just that, but you need to keep on top of your hunger, because if you have a bunch of hunger, that's going to lead to discontent. And you have to keep on track of, making sure that people aren't cold and you're taking a bunch of cold actions, because people are going to get sick. When they get too sick, they start getting ill and dying. And when people die, you lose hope. So everything is so interconnected that way, and it just creates these very thematic moments where, your society becomes very angry or very greedy over something, and then the events just keep happening and making things worse and making things worse in a very thematic way. I just love that. It just works so well. But I think the most surprising thing about Frostpunk for me was just how strategic of a game it is. I think I went in expecting more of something like This War of Mine. A very sort of, tons of strategy, but, you're also rolling the evil D10 and you're pushing your luck a lot in various different ways. And all that is done to sort of, replicate an experience. It's really a game about, having this experience. You experience that game and the stories and sort of the horror. Here, you have these events, you're making these moral decisions, but, there's no dice rolling. Every decision you make has a real strategic consequence. And even with all these random events happening, because all those events tend to deal with that morale system, it doesn't feel like just random things are happening. It feels like things are happening that kind of make sense just because of, where your society is at that moment. I don't know how to explain it, but the game feels extremely strategic to me, even more so than Robinson Crusoe, where again, you're pushing your luck, you're rolling a bunch of dice. There's none of that here. You're going to get exactly the resources that you want. You don't have to roll for it. When you take an action, that's the action you're taking. So it has a different feel than a lot of these other survival games that feature a lot more luck in it. is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about it and why it's such a great complement to a bunch of those other games. This doesn't feel like any other game that I own, and for that I'm so grateful. The last positive word here I want to give it is just the replayability in the box. There's a ton. You have all these different scenarios, but each scenario is infinitely replayable. I mean, I've played the first scenario over and over again, but when you play with a different society, there's like 6 different societies, and it makes a really big difference what you start with, how many meeples, right? Like, what's the current morale? It really changes, you know, what you can do and the strategies you need to have to survive, and gives you a different feel. But then there's also so much variable setup where you're gonna have different techs, different laws, different citizen cards, you know, a different starting map. It's just, there's so much here to explore. And unlike a lot of games that are stuff filled with, you know, different things and different modules and stuff, I'm actually excited to try all of them. And so there you go. That is Frostpunk the board game. Those are my thoughts. Have you played? What do you think of Frostpunk the board game? Please write it in the comments below. Check out my solo playthrough if you haven't. And anyway, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.